our concept here is we really wanted to take a quick look at how these projects have impacted real estate and how clients choose to implement within those products. And so we've put together a panel here just of a few different perspectives, whether it be really from the consulting perspective, the development perspective, and also all the way down to really the end user type perspective in the co-location marketplace. And so real quick, you guys want to do brief introductions? Chris?
Sure. I'm Chris Crosby, CEO of Compass Data Centers.
Matthew Kerner with Critical Project Services.
Ben Stewart with Terramark, a Verizon company.
I'm Matt Englert, Vice President, Rosen Electric, and President of Modular Power Solutions.
Great. Just to kind of format the discussion, because there's really so many different ways to look at modular. Matt, when your clients ask you, I'm considering modular, how do you explain and define the different options available for modular deployment?
It's really a lot like we've talked about today. There's, painting with a broad brush, there's two really distinct types of modular data centers. There's the, taking components of a traditional data center, whether that be mechanical systems or modular electrical rooms or something like that, and inserting them into a traditional piece of real estate, or an entire modular data center, the data center in a box, the Sun Black box, or whatever you have like that, are really the two basic types of modular data centers. And so figuring out what exactly they need from that standpoint obviously is the first step. But painting with a very large brush, that's the first step to figure out what type of modular they're looking for.
Okay, great. Within those two components, just so we have clarity, we'll just be referring to sort of the containerized solutions and then the modular component builds. But Ben, I know something that we kind of discussed earlier was your customers, really at the end level, your co-location customers. At the end of the day, is there a preference or indifference to whether they go into a modular solution or a containerized solution or a traditional build?
Well, talking about the modular solution, as far as the white space goes, our customers are looking for a certain look and feel that right now the modular solution just isn't delivering. But however, on the power or cooling side, they're looking for an SLA, they're looking for performance. They don't care how we deliver that performance. What we care about is how fast we can deliver that performance. What we found is with the modular solutions, it's still taking on the order of 16 to 20 weeks to get those things. They aren't readily available on the shelf. So if we've got an existing data center that we want to grow another meg of capacity into, we need power and cooling to do that. It's still taking us 16 to 20 weeks to get that stuff on site and plug it in. Whereas if we can build that white space out, build that brick and mortar facility out to accept a modular solution that we can turn around in a couple of weeks, we can deliver that capacity a lot faster to the customer, and that means we can build our sites to grow incrementally in much smaller divisions than we have to right now.
Okay. One of the interesting things is, especially depending on what level of decision maker you're dealing with on the enterprise client side, they might have an intimate knowledge and understanding of data centers, and some of them might have read an article over the weekend, talking about how this is going to revolutionize and change the world by Monday morning. And so, whenever they come to you and say, we'd really like to pursue modular, we'd really like to look into it, how do you frame, and this is to the group, how do you frame that discussion and set expectations and really guide them to a path to an ultimate decision without getting too conceptual?
Well, four. I think the big thing is this for whatever reason we confuse modular with prefabricated. Why they are confused, I don't understand. If you open up the dictionary and read what modular is, it's a standard set of components that can be assembled to get together quickly from a construction perspective. Whether that's built on site through a standardized design or whether that's built in a factory, I think we confuse a lot of things. We say modular, so therefore everything's got to be modular. So from a user perspective, what they want, I think, is speed. Is really at the end of the day where modular's coming into play from a lot of the users that are asking for modular. I think the other piece to it has to do with IT capacity planning. The hardest, other than the meaning of life, the hardest question to answer for anybody is how much IT capacity am I going to have? You know, a lot of folks don't even know what they have today, vast majority of them. So the modular component plays into that in terms of bite-sized chunks, you know, and working in whether if it's a service provider, it's timing my revenue and my capital expense or operating expense as closely together and as tightly together as possible, kind of made to order. If you know, wait until they're there. Maybe you've got the patties ready, but you don't put the burger together until they show up. And then if it's in the enterprise environment, it's really, I got no idea what's coming in the future. So having modular concepts is there. But at the end of it, I'm still very confused as to why we call prefabricated modular. You know, prefabrication is a technique, not necessarily you know, the only solution for modular.
Great. Consistency, I think, is also an approach that people are looking for with a modular build. You know, if I've got a dozen data centers around the world and I'm looking for the exact same approach and the ability to maintain each of those data centers in all of those locations, having a consistent approach at every one of those locations is huge. I mean, it's essential. And having that consistent approach, whether that's through modular or prefabrication or however that is something that we're driving and seeing a lot more of now.
You know, we're doing the same thing in the multi-tenant market. You know, it's the Southwest Airlines model, stick with 737s. And only train your people and get your spare parts and your service contracts down to a limited amount that you have to manage. And what that does is it drives our costs down so that we can pass those savings along and be more competitive in the co-location market in the areas that we serve.
Yeah, I mean, on the piece that Steve and Mark just did, you know, design is up there. Well, you got to throw design out. I mean, you've got to get to standardize in order to, you know, now are you going to hit every single customer when no, you're not. But you got to figure out for your business what's going to meet most of them, you know.
Interesting. So in looking at kind of global markets, if you're talking about a customer that has a data center solution that is replicated over and over and over again, you know, there have to be pretty particular qualifications to meet a modular deployment. When looking at existing real estate, what are some of the high points of really what you would like to have to fit most prefabricated modular deployments? Anything in particular that changes versus traditional?
I think, once again, consistency in the approach. It's key to be able to deploy a consistent product to your customers. You know, whether I'm building a data center in Dallas, Texas, or in China or Africa or India, you know, I've got to be able to deliver that consistent approach, especially if I've got the same customer that's occupying that data center in each of those locations.
I mean, the development piece is huge. A lot of the products that are out there as data centers, there's no way you're getting that thing permitted in a lot of environments. There's no way that they're going to allow those types of products, not in, you know, you go to a planning board and try to do that sort of thing. You can work those things in certain places, but if you're going to develop product, especially in a lot of the places that from a service provider perspective, you know, 20 minutes from the headquarters of the Fortune 500 or within these core market areas, you've got to have something that works from an aesthetics, from a building perspective, and that makes a huge difference in terms of how you look at these products. I think you can put stuff in a cornfield somewhere, absolutely, and you can do whatever you want in a lot of those environments. But the fact of the matter is, the vast majority of data centers are still centered around metro areas.
In the more dense urban environments, Matt, I know you've been recently working on a project in China. What are some of the advantages that you've seen for modular there?
A big advantage would be, you know, especially in a market, a dense market like China, is the fact that, you know, if I'm taking an entire electrical suite and installing it into a facility, a traditional real estate piece of real estate, that's a lot less layout space, a lot less boots on the ground that I need. It's a much quicker approach to construction on site. You know, if I'm building a 200,000 square foot facility and I need 15 acres to be able to do that from a standard construction approach, but in a place like China where, you know, I may be given a very small perimeter around my building to be able to do that, you know, to build a data center, the amount of layout space and storage space that you need is enormous. And to be able to have on-time construction and bring large pieces of equipment and put them on site it's a big deal.
Okay. Chris, something that I think is interesting is you look at from a development perspective, up front, time to market can be less, can be the same. CapEx can be the same, can be less from a traditional build versus modular build. What about the back end of that project, the exit? I mean, how does that affect the development community if you're going more of a modular approach?
Well, you need to be careful about what's considered real estate at the end of the day. What are you selling? You're either selling, you're selling one of two ways. You're selling an income stream, which is one thing. But if you can put it on the flatbed truck and move it, is it really associated there? Or you're selling the real estate itself because the clients left the facility, and so you just got to be careful about asset life and what you're doing. Is it a building? Buildings are depreciated over 39 years. Is it a building, or can it just go somewhere else? And the multiples are going to be a lot different for a building than they are for a tin shed at the end of the day.
Okay. Matt Engler, with what you guys are doing in designing these systems today, is there anything that you have to do differently in the ultimate implementation as far, again, setting expectations with the client, traditional build, custom build versus modular, that they need to know up front going into the process?
So I think the biggest thing with modular is it's prefabrication. It's a different way to construct, okay? So at the end of the day, if we're going to provide a traditional data center space in a modular fashion, it all, it's the construction, it's a different way to construct. It's a different construction technique. I would say that, traditionally data centers have been built just-in-time deliveries. So we have just-in-time design, just-in-time construction, just-in-time commissioning for a just-in-time end user. I would say with modular to reap the benefits of decreased time to market. I would say that involves a lot more planning with the end user. There's a lot more benefit to the end user if we can plan instead of just in time to be able to forecast something like DLR is doing right now. Right, they're forecasting, so they're be able to reap the benefits of the delivery by forecasting.
Okay. I mean, is there any point in that process, from the very early beginning, conceptual, down to site selection, down to actually being at the building itself, that yet you really push the client to say, okay, we need to choose one methodology or the other? Or do you see it as more flexible? You can really get to the building and then decide?
So what we're doing is very, very flexible. And like I mentioned before, it just takes a lot more interaction with the end user or whoever's going to be implementing the modular solution to kind of bottom out in some of those decisions.
Okay. Whenever it comes to containerized data centers, not the prefab modular components, but an actual data center within a box, really, are we looking at a glorified warehouse whenever it comes to real estate, or are there things above and beyond that you look for in particular implementing a container within an existing real estate building?
I'm not a fan of that. As an old IT guy, I don't like those types of environments to walk into. But from the standpoint of a real estate perspective, it's a very fungible, short depreciation type of asset. So its ability to be repurposed is pretty difficult. Move, add, and change is really difficult in those types of environments. Being in Dallas, Texas, I don't like seeing the tractor trailers flying through the air like with the tornado the other day. I think that's a solution, And for people that can think in terms of 300 kilowatt load groups with associated, picking hardware and they're not going to, make a whole lot of changes to it, great. But an ISO container for an IT environment's that's not my cup of tea. From a real estate perspective, development perspective, financeability perspective, it presents a lot of issues.
And from a multi-tenant perspective, if I could add, again, these data centers are something we build and they will come. So we need to build something that's going to attract customers into it. And those customers expect a certain look and feel that we're just not seeing yet with the modular solution. However, on the component, power and cooling piece of it, they don't care about that at all. And in some parts of the world, we just can't get the labor to put that together for us like we can domestically. Some parts of the world, when you start talking UPS and static switches, you start talking about flywheel UPS, forget it. I mean, that's got to be built somewhere where the skill set exists, because not only can't we find the skill set where we're trying to build it, we can't fly the skill set in there because of labor laws, et cetera. We just can't get the people in there. So it's got to be built somewhere else and then delivered to the site, which actually works out pretty well. And in a few cases for us, it's worked out extremely well.
From I guess talking about the ability to deploy in a phased type fashion, are there any significant advantages or disadvantages to doing a traditional phased build or doing a traditional modular build?
Well, do you mean a discrete increments that are totally isolated, or do you mean the big shared backplane that no one can ever commission in the future?
Right.
Which have had the most spectacular outages as we bought some of those buildings over the years. I think the commissioning piece is a big part of is a big flaw out there today. I mean, as I went through things for Compass, looking at the different solutions, IST, integrated system testing, is just not part of the space yet. I personally don't like the thought of going on Boeing's Dreamliner until I know that it's been flown a few times. And the same thing happens in the data center space. So on the phased building, I think the key for modular is to be able to be discrete, to be able to be in independent components, because then you're truly looking at the total problem. Otherwise, you do the big backplane and all this stuff. I mean, we've been doing that for a long time. That's not really I think that's a fantasy phased approach.
On the commissioning front, one thing that we have seen is that when we bring all the pieces to the site and we put them together and take it through level 3, level 4, level 5 commissioning, et cetera, we find things. Things break, things aren't right, and it takes time to fix that. However, if it's built somewhere else and tested before it gets here, the number of those occurrences is reduced, so we can actually deliver the product quite a bit faster.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so in your experience, having really one manufacturer for those components, if something goes wrong, something breaks, something needs to be replaced, because it's from one group, does that simplify or sometimes complicate?
Long term simplifies. Short term, it's like anything else. It's an initial build. But after you develop that relationship and you're building that consistent model over and over and over, when you see things, you know what they are. You know what the problem is. So the time to research that and find the solution is essentially non-existent. You know right away, at set up delta, it's supposed to be Y. I mean, it's very simple stuff.
If you're designing it different every time, no.
Right.
But if you turn it into a supply chain issue, which is actually what this is, and you're working with the same providers and the same products and the same specs, then yeah, of course you can make massive improvements job to job to job. Of course you can get operating benefits. It's the concept of changing stuff that, as Steve and Mark pointed out, change is the killer. I mean, if you're going to do change and modular, it's an oxymoron. Don't do it.
And to Chris's earlier point about that incremental growth, if the design accepted that early on and you're building 8 ports on the back of this building but only putting in 3 day one and growing those ports as those customers come and the power densities that you perhaps didn't expect end up on the floor, or the customer grows on the floor, and you can bring these things in and just plug them in, fantastic. But it's got to be designed from the beginning. It's not something you do after the fact.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah, modular definitely takes a lot of planning with whoever like I mentioned before, whoever the end user is, it takes a lot of planning.
Okay. Are there any particular examples where, one way or the other, modular worked insanely well for a particular application, or you went down the modular path and it was not the right fit?
We've got some oil and gas clients that they do work in some less than desirable places in the world. And building a traditional data center, even though it's a small data center, I mean, we're talking 12, 15, 18 racks, is not an option. And so you pretty much have to put in the data center in a box. And some of the reasons behind that, you know, number one, there's no skilled labor to be able to build it there. But number two, you look at a place like Libya here recently, where in order to do away with any sort of social uprising, the government has the ability to hit the big red button and shut the internet down. And you may not have internet, you may not have power, and you've got to get $100 million worth of seismic data out of the country quickly. And the only real way to do that is to be able to pick your data center up and put it on a C-130 or put it on a truck and get it out. And so those are the things that, you know, that sometimes we have to consider that, you know, if you're building here in Dallas, Texas, that's not a big issue.
Yeah, it's what's the problem?
If you're, yeah.
What's the thing that we're trying to solve? I mean, there's clearly applications for that. You know, I think a lot of times we just take we use a hammer on everything. Everything looks like a nail. You know, there's good solutions in different areas. You know, if the hammer's the only tool we have, that's, you know, then everything's going to be a nail, and we're prefabbing everything. Well, why are we prefabbing everything? Or why are you you know, you just got to ask what the problem is. I mean, they're a totally different set of problems. You know, if you're going into Brazil and you don't want to import in the electrical labor, you better do your electrical rooms on the front end, right?
Absolutely right.
You know, but if you're in a you know, yeah, Dallas, Texas, fine. You've got a few more tools in the toolbox at that point in time.
When doing a greenfield build with the thought in mind of having modular, mechanical, electrical, is the planning such that you really have to continue to go down that road throughout the life of the asset? You reach end of life replacement, or can it be redeployed in traditional?
And make sure I understand the question. So when you're doing a greenfield new development that's going to grow over time, are you asking about the planning approvals? Or?
The shell itself, if you're putting in modular components, do you see it as being able to, in its next life? Because a lot of the data center assets you see in real estate, they've been a data center 3, 4, 5 times over. Do you have to think of anything when you're designing that greenfield to make it flexible long term?
Well, yeah. You do.
What are some examples?
That's why, at least in my case, with Compass now, we made the building itself the module that you then connect together. So because of that very issue. So if you're going to build out the big football field, you know, building, you lose a lot of the benefit of the modular in the first place because you just spent $25 million for a shell. And then you're going to build out over time inside of that shell. The build out over time, of course you can reuse stuff. I mean, you know, in my previous life, we did, what, Steve? Vast majority, 95% of the projects in the early days were redevelopment inside of real estate. And it was all kinds of real estate that you'd fit things into. And so I think that you can always reuse something if it's got a utility. Utility feed that's a good feed, and it's got a couple fiber hookups. So that's always going to have lifespan.
And that is the key. You were mentioning site selection earlier. It doesn't matter if it's brick and mortar, stick, modular, it's the power and the connectivity. That's what drives that site, because that's not something you can get in there easily.
And planning approval.
Well, and to that point, absolutely, if you're going into some Podunk, Idaho place to do a modular build, you might want to have a chat with the AHA first and find out what kind of problems you're going to deal with. You don't want to be the first one.
What the heck is that thing?
Yeah, exactly right.
Doesn't work out real well.
Yeah.
Matt, what are some of the things you look for when selecting a modular component? I mean, just some examples.
Ability to service it is one. Modular is great, and being able to productize a large component of your data center is I think what we're all driving toward. But the ability to service it, the ability to get a consistent approach is key. I don't want to build a modular data center and have a certain supplier that today is going to give me manufacturer A and tomorrow is going to give me manufacturer B, and I've got to be able to support all of that. Having that consistent approach and being able to support that long term is really big for me. And then speed to market, obviously.
Okay. Just a couple of thoughts to wrap this up. As you see real estate today, what are some changes that you've seen in developers trying to cater towards modular for a shell development? Do you see certain things being changed or modified to the real estate to make it more attractive for a traditional real estate or a modular redevelopment?
I mean, it's the buzzword du jour right now. I mean, this space is still a hard problem to solve. I mean, there's a lot of skill sets. There's real estate skill sets. There's MEP skill sets. There's telecom skill. I mean, it's not a simple problem. As a result of that, from a real estate perspective, yeah, you see a lot of guys. I mean, you go down over Alpha Road over, by the Galleria, and every single one of those warehouse buildings with zero lot line, I'll say data center, So, data centers are buzz in the real estate community. There's a lot going on with them. What kind of considerations do you need to make? I think the smart developers are the ones that are trying to get entitled for the future, trying to max out what they can do on the site with the least amount of issues from the AHJ on a go-forward basis. But there's a whole lot of developers that are out there that maybe don't come in from the IT world or don't understand a lot of the things, and they'll latch on to a product and think that that's what the market needs, and they'll have something that sits there either unleased or unsold or whatever the case may be for quite some period of time. So I think the key is you got to figure out where the sites are that have the power, that have the fiber, that have the right kind of planning approvals to be able to get things done, because you want to have as much flexibility as possible in those environments.
Great. Any questions from the audience for our panelists? Yes.
There's a lot of discussion about consistency and being able to maintain the similar equipment, getting similar arrangements. For those of you that have got deployments, locations that are global, one of the things that we run into as a design firm is trying to figure out the different listing agencies, IEC versus UL oriented, what have you. Even equipment configurations are different. If you're going to use equipment in Asia, it may be a completely different configuration. Coming down from an electrical perspective, the ampacity, the circuit breaker type, even the switchgear arrangements are different. So how do you take that approach if you're going globally, where you need to develop a type for use per region, or are you trying to implement the U.S. version in other locations? Because I've been in the Middle East, and I've walked into a data center, and I've seen a Liebert piece of equipment, 208 120 volt, because 60 hertz that we use here, next to a piece that looks like it was made in somebody's garage. Both serving similar rack-mounted equipment. So there's a mix and match in some of the areas I've been. I'm just curious if you could look at your consistency, how you approach that.
We've done it both ways, and one works extremely well and one doesn't. And it's trying to force the U.S. standard into places that it doesn't fit. I mean, you have to go into those places with an engineering firm or an A&E firm who's very familiar with the things in that area, explain to them your basis of design, and then make trade-offs to get to what you need to be as consistent as possible. It's never going to be 100%, especially when you're talking in a global scenario where there are some realities. I mean, 20 amp breakers versus 32 amp breakers, 240 versus 208 110. I mean, there's things that the customers are going to expect and want that you've got to deliver, that if you don't engage local resources who are smart on that kind of stuff, you're end up going to be delivering a brick where they want on a cinder block.
Asia Pac's a lot easier in terms of its acceptance of prefabrication. There's a lot of already prefabricated stuff just due to the land issues that exist. You get into, but you definitely can't cram. Well, first off, it's kind of hard to make 60 hertz turn into 50 hertz all overnight. So, but there's a lot of issues. I know the companies that have gone over into Europe, and then they'll be, well, yeah, and we're putting our conduits here, and we're doing, well, we don't use conduits, we use cable tray. So you have to be cognizant of that stuff. Don't go blazing ahead in those worlds. You'll look pretty silly.
Chris, you made a comment. You said our building is the model. Talk a little more.
Just go to the website. That's a lot easier. I'm not going to sit up here and sales pitch Mr. Bolner with Stream Data Center.